and welcome to this panel. I will start with the first question for all of you, and I'm starting with maybe a provocative question, and that is, does an established fashion brand need a digital collection? And if it does, when do you think is the right moment to start thinking about it? Yes? You can
No.
No.
So me and Leslie said we were going to predominantly argue on this panel, so here we go. Yes. I think from the point of inception, definitely the landscape is ready for it. We've seen that the IRL and URL realities are something that need to work together and should be working around one another. They shouldn't be working, they should be working in tandem, in unison, not separately. And I think right now, the Web3 space and the fashion luxury space is a bit like oil and water. So part of our work at IoDF is creating a synergy between those two realities. So, yes. It was off.
At all. I said no because I agree with everything Leanne said, naturally. But a company has to think very carefully about, why am I doing this? What is it for? Who is it for? I already have a brand, I have a brand reputation, and what is digital going to add to that? And I think that's really important. So I would say no, because you really have to think about it first.
Okay, I would say yes. I think ultimately in 3 to 5 years, every single brand will have digital prints. There will be a digital version of every physical item, and the ones that don't adopt now will be left behind. I think that there's big, you know, sort of high street brands that are already quite far behind where you know, the market is. And even, you know, new brands are coming onto the space, are further ahead of brands, and brands have quite a lot catching up to do in this space. So I think they should start now.
I agree with the yes, but it depends on objectives, right? Of the brands, of the company. I think within luxury retail, if I look at our customers, I think the challenge they have and they face, it's on invitation only. They are one-time purchases, and so how do I actually build a connection with the consumer, right? So how do I let consumers crave for brand desirability? And then I think digital provides additional touch points, which are quite interesting, and with the advanced technology, I think brands should really play in this space.
Thank you. Yeah, I would say yes as well. I think that initially brands kind of thought that digital product is only relevant within video games and for people who exist within gamified environments. However, the same tools that were created initially for the video gaming industry are now building from the core the infrastructure of every metaverse experience that we will be having. So in that context, I think that it's relevant to say that each one of us is becoming more or less part of these gamified experiences and environments, and therefore the distribution of of digital product within those realms is extremely relevant for fashion brands.
Okay, so just summarizing, let's say that a brand has carefully thought whether to go, let's say, Phygital or not, and they say, okay, let's do it. So, what are the main tools and skills that define the know-how then in the kind of digital world? And I think this has been touched in the previous panel as well. Do you think that this know-how should be eventually developed in-house, or there is space actually for agencies to exist and collaborate?
Shall I go with this one? Shall I start? Or okay, cool. So I think we have to see it like in different pillars, because if we're talking about fashion design, then the tools would be mainly digital design software like Clo3D, Marvelous Designer, which have been used for a while now within big luxury brands. Luxury brands have established teams who are actually working with these tool sets to generate digital product. But if we see it on the side of showcasing, which is also extremely relevant, because apart from generating a digital asset, I think it's very important to also be able to animate it and distribute it to diverse audiences across the world. So on that side of things, I would say that game engines, as I briefly mentioned before, build that infrastructure of being able to curate different kinds of 3D experiences. Apart from designing 3D worlds, creators are also able to articulate and narrate the ways they want their audience to interact with those experiences, which for me is fascinating. And to the second scale of the question about the in-house skill sets, I think that of course it helps if brands have those skills internally, because they can cross-collaborate with other departments between design, marketing, communications, all of that. But to me, I think one of the most important things is, apart from the 3D skill sets, it's also very, very relevant for brands to have in-house leadership roles who understand the technology in depth and are able to manage and curate those kinds of projects to better extents.
Definitely.
I was going to say as well, obviously, like Clone 3D is an amazing gravity simulating software, so that means it's a shortcut for lots of design processes, but also as well augmented reality. Snap, we see the fact that you can actually quite easily, and also with Spark AR, design for those functionalities which are quite simple and quite practical coding. And I think actually the big conversation here is the pivot is a community pivot. We've just seen Pharrell become the creative director for Louis Vuitton. So if you as an individual have a community and an aesthetic agenda, then you can create your own brand from that. So as opposed to talking about luxury brands and conglomerates, it's actually talking about the future, which is the individuals in this room and the people that have the gaze and the vocabulary to actually stare into the future without all the nuts and bolts that a luxury fashion house has. So I think the brave steps come from the community pivots, and then actually luxury brands are listening. And we'll see much more that these luxury brands will be painted in their fabrics for communities to use within their production to then create a scalable version of their brand rhetoric. So I think that's like an interesting part.
I mean, I think I'm come from a product background, and just starting with design, Clone 3D, right at the beginning of the concept of design, will help every single brand with their digital journey, because once you start at the beginning, it can save with product development, it can save in sampling, you can then run that all the way through to production, and then afterwards you have the 3D assets to use in metaverse and wearables. But if it can all start at the beginning, I think it's a really easy fix for them to do in-house. But there are much more complicated things like avatars and AR that I think they'll probably outsource at the moment, because it's not worth bringing the skills in-house yet. So, and there's a lot of people in this room who are really amazing at that.
Yeah, I'm just going to throw in one additional perspective, right, which I think is taking one step back and then look at it holistically, or at least try to look at it. I think we live in an era of search-based e-commerce, right? And I think everybody that represents a brand here today is paying an awful lot of money for digital marketing as such on centralized platforms. And I think the opportunity here I love the decentralized, but for that matter, is actually to start building community and change the experience, right? So how do you evolve from click to buy to experience to buy, and which skill sets do you actually need to make that happen? To Leanne's point, if you look at this week's Snap introduction of ray tracing, right? So enabling or rendering light and shine on products, that's great. So do we expect the fashion designer to also master that? I think that becomes a key question. I think if you compare it to e-commerce back in the days, I think digitally becomes, again, it creates an equal level playing field for a fashion designer, because only leveraging Snap as a channel, I think it has distributed or social commerce checkout capabilities, so you can go from digital quick fashion to immediate checkout or convert in a single channel, and that makes it quite interesting. And then that's where one of the experiences could start. So you're changing the customer journey, leveraging digital fashion.
wait till the end. Everything starts with education, and it is very expensive to digitalize a company. Many companies face a huge hurdle in understanding what to do, how to do it, where to go, who to speak to, how much money this is going to cost. I mean, there's many other things that they need to spend money on just now. Perhaps it is also a luxury to start thinking about digital. I would say that you have to go out of house to get the right skills and the right kind of people to come in to talk to you in the language that you need. One of the key things I would say is that we must be able to bring Web 2 people into Web 3 and communicate properly with them about what that can be. It's quite a hurdle to get over if you just sort of jump into a LinkedIn webinar and think, what are they talking about? What is this language? So that needs to be made clearer, and it needs to be more accessible, and there needs to be a clear journey towards digitalization. And I'm talking not just about the metaverse, but I'm talking about right from the very first point of a designer using 3D virtual prototyping, using Clo, and then how that links through. And perhaps the metaverse should not be the end result.
It's because it's not formed yet. We talk about the metaverse as a constellation of touch points, so be it AR, VR, Decentraland, etc., or Twitter Spaces, you know? Like, what does it mean, actually? And I think that vocabulary, which you perfectly introduced, is something that is very complex. A friend of ours who's quite, a confident woman, you know, she basically tried to open a wallet and instead created an NFT called Sarah Blonstein. You know, it's really, it's kind of like, everything feels back end, you feel stupid at the first point. So I think to your point, Leslie, it is very complicated. It's because it is complex right now. And there's so many different options and gateways and ways to navigate, but that's the exciting part of this. And we all have the opportunity to build this new narrative and do it the right way, to make it inclusive and diverse and sustainable. And that is what IoDF we really stand for, which is why a third of all our projects are philanthropic, have our IRL URL Academy. And it is all about how do we, not to use the word handhold, but how do we all do it together collectively to make sure that some of the fundamental mistakes aren't made, which means spending budgets where they don't need to be, but also as well giving the power to those who can have the opportunity, the creator economy, to actually build it with us. So yeah.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add in terms of the tools before that, yeah, as Leanne was saying, there's so many different ways of kind of realizing those projects. So coming back to digital design, sometimes brands associate like digital product with the fact that they will need to create it only through Clo 3D and Marvelous Designer. However, we shouldn't forget technologies that are able to actually allow us to digitize existing physical pieces and then completely manipulate them by using 3D software, like photogrammetry, for example, volumetric capture, which are techniques that initially would require access to very expensive equipment, but gradually the technology is becoming much more democratized through smartphone applications. So yeah, as I was saying, I think it's about those leadership roles who will be able to adapt to that landscape and kind of identify the right technology pipeline for each specific creative output, I guess.
I guess it's a matter of culture, right? Because you were touching upon the language, the narrative, also the opportunity to blend the tools with an intention. And so when it comes to marketing and branding a digital fashion collection, how do we do that? Is there any difference in a way from any marketing strategy that we use when we work in the physical world?
I think it's a really complex web, back to that point. I mean, I don't know who of us are on Discord, what an absolute mind that place is. It's like constantly being stung by 1,000 bees and everyone's like kind of aggressive. Whereas, and it's very complex, but there's also lots of really helpful moderators that work for free to handhold and give you code, and it's just this kind of marvellous universe. And so where do you launch? If you want to market a digital collection, where do you launch it? Who's the end customer? I think it absolutely depends on what the digital collection is. If it's a hate or a bored ape, obviously Discord and Twitter. If it's a collection in which you're trying to change the system, in which we did a project with H&M, and it was about how we transform the business of H&M, a fast fashion house, and how we pivot that to one that doesn't greenwash, but instead actually rewrite some sustainability narratives within the brand. So within that, we launched a digital collection. So we're talking to fast fashion consumers, which are very social. We didn't touch Discord. So again, it comes back to the point of who is and it's very, the narration of it is very complex, and it has to be sat with the right brand, with the right, and then incrementally it's what space it sits within, it's launched within, comes back to the brand vocabulary. In the same way, your physical collection, like how would you launch that? There'll be different influences, there'll be different networks. I think that's the parallels between the two. Actually, quite simple. You have to actually, number one, create legacy, because we are in a time where all of our work at some points is seen as gimmick. So we now speak with C-suite and not PR directors, because it means it has legacy, and it's about business innovation and not just one-step PR moment and buzz. So I think it has to be about what the demographic you're speaking to and work backwards from that. And it's very complex, but the answers are definitely there.
Just one answer on that. I think we're used to push a lot from a marketing perspective, and I think the consumer is capable enough to actually pull information. Only the gamified mechanisms, I think, can change now, and I think for the better. So that becomes interesting, right? Yesterday I queued up for a New Balance Stone Island sneaker. I queued up with 300k people because I could actually see the amount of people in the queue. I thought, oh man, they should have put it on chain with an NFT related to it, which would have given me a fairer chance to actually get my hands on the sneaker. So I'm putting that information, you don't have to push it, and I think that is applicable to a lot of consumers. I think from a marketing perspective, I think a lot of businesses talk about consumer experience, and I think for me personally, it's brand experience, user experience, consumer experience, combined that actually may create for brand desirability. I think ultimately, whether it's physical, digital, virtually, it is about brand desirability where it comes to marketing.
I think that brands that you need to fish where the fish are, essentially. It's one thing with their existing audience. So existing audience, you need to educate and help them on the journey to understand why they need digital fashion and what it means. And if their community isn't quite ready, then it's a huge opportunity to garner new communities, such as gaming and people that are already into Roblox or digital fashion. It's a very easy win if you go to different communities.
Yeah, I've not really got much to add to this. You've all said a fantastic amount. I mean, it really depends on who the market is, obviously, but the market for digital fashion is pretty clear, isn't it? I mean, it's a bit millennials, it's mostly Gen Z, it's a bit of Gen X. And I think companies like Gucci are showing us how to market on Roblox, which I think is very worrying when you think that they're selling to 13-year-olds, 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds, and why are they doing this? Why are they marketing to that age group? The only reason that I can possibly think of is that is their future customer base. Yeah, absolutely. So they get them young. And I think that's questionable. And I think we have to question whether that is how we want digital fashion to be marketed. So I think... Yeah. Thank you.
I think, you know, just example, Alo Yoga, my 13-year-old would never ever wear Alo Yoga. I don't think they even do children's wear. But she's got Alo Yoga pants in Roblox. And you know, and I'm like, okay, well, maybe when she graduates to adult clothing, she's going to wear Alo Yoga. And I think it's this is the kind of the pinch point for brands, the entry point.
It's also so marketing. I'm just going to leverage the fact that my daughter, right, I think she sees a representation for Gen Z, studies fashion design, and I think one thing to actually look at is she's a digital born native, right? So I mean, and currently she's consuming content in quite a boring way on a small screen in 2D, and I think her outlook is consuming content in an immersive way in 3D, and I think that's what we should focus on.
Yeah, I was going to say also, the other thing is interoperability. I mean, which is a big positioning piece, but also is again very complex. Like, how do you move from one asset? How does that move from your wallet from Decentraland, from say DressX, and then when you would like to also wear it in Meta. And then if you want to wear it in AR on a different platform, there's all these roadblocks at the moment, and then roadblocks. So how do you navigate that? I think interoperability is one of the exciting position points and what the consumers are demanding. Also, like, how do you launch a digital fashion product? Again, by listening to the individuals that are on these games that have been brought up in that space, that also that Depop culture where they want to buy, own, sell, wear, trade. And they see an asset exactly as we see it's an asset, you know, it's an asset that doesn't sit in their wardrobe at all. If you go into a wardrobe, it's not about hoarding, it's actually about sharing and seeing it as a financial asset. They can earn more, they can also customize and resell, and I think that is the really interesting model, and that is the model of youth right now. And of course, it's very complex speaking to 10, 13-year-olds about their fashion choices. But I think what's interesting about that perspective as well, it's not about fashion, it's about identity. We've got a white paper that's launching, and it's primarily about Roblox consumers, players, how they see themselves, what gender means to them, and why does a 10-year-old cis white boy, why do they have a cage around themselves, 3 breasts, a supersized female, and toxic green skin? What does that mean? I mean, it's crazy to see, you know, but it's this visual identity that they've built, and the fact that they have a toolbox in which they can not just colour things in or put stickers on their jacket, but actually craft a whole identity world that they can play in and earn from. And that's what's really exciting. And for us, that's what we see the next part of IoDF being, supporting that, supporting the ecosystem so that they can actually have profitable asset shares in their future, in their wardrobe.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think with the digital tools, actually, yeah, what's happening is that the body is no longer a barrier in territory in fashion design, so you don't have to see the body as the territory of, you know, putting fabric on top. It's actually the starting point of generating anything you could possibly imagine, and to me that's like extremely fascinating in terms of the layers of abstraction that you can play with and the amount of creative freedom that you have to kind of design and curate immaterial layers on top of your own identity, in terms of the fact that there are no limits and barriers in regards to that. So I think, yeah, that's really, really powerful.
But it comes down to money then. It's about how you sell that asset on.
So it's also again about community, so you can earn collectively, and the asset doesn't have to be purchased. You can create you can build an asset, build on top of it from a free asset, and create scarcity on that asset. So actually, it's the creative journey is paid for effectively. You can earn from, and which just seems like quite a scholarship perspective. Yeah, but I know what you mean. It's about worth, but cultural worth, cultural kudos, is cultural capital. It's more sustainable.
Can I throw in the conversation something else? Because you're describing a different, completely different world, because we're talking about new way to express ourselves, new way to represent our body, to detach from our body and create another body, and yet, you know, to exactly. What about then for a brand managing this world and this portfolio of users or community, as you say, and the old customership? Do brands need to kind of manage them together, these kind of customerships? Do they, how much can they blend?
I think it will be licensed. So you license part of the brand fabricality to those individuals. We did a project, we got 6 industry world firsts, and one of them was Roxander at London Fashion Week to create an augmented reality garment that was minted and became an NFT. But it was sold in pounds, not crypto. So everyone hated us at that. It was all of the Web3 crypto bros like, makes no sense. But the point is that we wanted to choose a luxury house based in London that has no Web3 aesthetic, no Web3 community, and see it as a testing ground. How do you pivot these people, the regular customers, to having a wallet, to understanding an NFT, to the understanding how powerful it was to have the file of an asset and what that meant. And it was, you know, it worked. People purchased the NFT, but the hand-holding again behind and the educational bit behind was 5, 7, we're still doing it, 12 months of work of taking all of these individuals who are women 40 plus, purchasing a luxury brand. They purchased it from the website to start, okay, but then we have to set up the wallets. So it is very complex, the two quite separate worlds. And I think it is, how do you blend those vocabularies? Do you? Or is there towers of the brand positioning, which one of them is licensing part of your brand to these separate communities and separate transactional and creative ventures in which they can see their brand go forth. Obviously Nike at the forefront with Nike ID, then so obviously the 15 years later working with Artifact makes sense.
No, I think that a great way to kind of be able to nurture these communities is also by linking physical product to digital assets. Recently I was doing consultancy for a big sportswear brand, and the main question that they had, like they were saying to me that, we know how to create like a physical store location happenings, we know how to create physical experiences, bring people into the store. What we're struggling with is how can we maintain that community that we built there beyond the store, outside of the store, within these metaverse experiences, within social media, within digital platforms. And I think a great way to do that is by, as I was saying before, linking physical product to digital assets and exploring what is the potential of that. Recently we worked on a project at the FIA with Snapchat and an Austrian-based company called Reactive Reality. So the idea was to digitize existing pieces from our wardrobe, which we had for a couple of years, and then create a template, a platform through which we could completely manipulate and interact with those garments. So potentially, like instead of just acquiring a physical asset, you could acquire that asset, but also a ticket to endless digital experiences and ways of interacting with that asset. And I think to me that is great as well in terms of increasing product life cycles and helping consumers and audiences kind of hold on to their products, but also nurturing communities that are not super tech savvy as well by giving them more value to the physical product that they purchase in a way.
I think that it's a good point. So I think that the loyalty program is a really interesting one of onboarding new customers. So for example, at Phygital Twin, you were working with an influencer we just launched with one. She's got a very Web2 audience, but we knew that when we launched with her, so what we did was everything is available as a digital and a physical, and then you can check out normally, as anyone would, and then you redeem your NFT. So there's no barrier to entry, it's very easy, you can just use a tourist wallet. And then the NFT, once you've redeemed it, gives you access to a VIP per VIP loyalty program. So that would be like an incentive for people to bother to do it, because I think there's a resistance, as you said, Leanne. It's not easy to have a wallet, you know, and there's so many technicalities.
Did many people take up the NFT?
Not yet.
Yeah,
that's a thing. I'm like, did you redeem your NFT?
I feel like we need to all be there, like,
yeah,
singing and dancing, be like,
exactly.
This is what it
is. It's really tricky, and it's like, how do you educate them quickly enough that don't be scared of it? It's really easy to do. And I think the other thing is collaborations as well. You know, just to mention obviously Epic Games here, and what Balenciaga did with Fortnite is a great use case of how people can, you know, a brand can go into a video game and then into a digital collection without affecting their actual brand. It's like a completely separate collaboration with somebody that's already doing it. I think that's good.
Yeah, I think it also depends on the brand and the existing target audience. I think for me, Ralph Lauren is a good example, right? Because at low cost, they digitize historical catalogs, and they monetize on selling skins, which is quite easy. Doesn't have a Web3 element in there, but I think it's a good example in the industry. If you look at, for example, luxury retail, I think token-gated hype drops seem to work. Token-gated access to events like this seem to work, but I think that there's one thing that's not there yet, which is a lot of companies, brands, they ride the hype cycle, but they're not very systematic after the hype cycle. So I think if you look at Artifact, that is leading at the forefront with their digital ecosystem, they really have a very strong strategic roadmap, right? So it's really systematic, and I think having those strategic roadmaps in place to continue engaging the community, that's really important to maintain and then the community, but also to elevate loyalty.
There's a lot of brands that just say, you know, here's VIP membership, but like without any roadmap. You know, it's just, yeah.
Can I just ask, and actually open for question on the floor? Yes.
Thank you. Great session. I've got so many questions, but I'll try and keep it down to one. So it depends on the intention, right? If digital collections are there to encourage more physical clothing sales, or are they there to replace physical clothing sales and therefore make money off low-cost digital products? Do you think ultimately digital collections will mean more physical clothing production or less?
Yes, I do. Unfortunately, I do. I think of course there is the argument that digital clothing is a very sustainable thing and it's going to encourage sustainability, etc., etc., etc. But I think at the end of the day, it's also about creating more emotion, more feelings about clothing, and I think the key is Phygital, and it's really about driving towards buying physically. So I see that as the main thing that's actually going to push digital forward in the industry, as the promise of selling more clothes, unfortunately. But I do see digital, and I know that you're going to disagree with me, which is great, because that's what it's about, but I do see the importance of digital through the whole digitalization process, of course, from concept through to virtual showroom selling, totally digital, no samples, it's a no-brainer, that should happen totally, and then at the other end, e-commerce, all digital. So that part in the middle, which is so difficult to digitalize, and that's the biggest problem. And of course you've got companies like Shein who are using AI just to make more clothes. So you have to be careful. Who's going to argue with me?
So last Fashion Week, we paraded